My name is Jake Miller, a 28-year-old nobody who spends most of his days ringing up gas and stale snacks at the quick stop in Havenwood, Pennsylvania. It's a small town, the kind where everyone knows your business before you do, and nothing much happens beyond the occasional bar fight or a lost dog poster taped to a pole. I live alone in a rundown house on Lincoln Avenue, the kind with peeling paint and a roof that groans every time the wind picks up. I've always been a night owl, scrolling through my phone or listening to creepy podcasts until the early hours, chasing stories that make my skin crawl because real life here is just too damn boring. That is, until the night everything went to hell and I saw something that still claws at the back of my mind every time I close my eyes. It was 9:45 p.m. on March 13th, 2025, and I was sprinting through the ruins of my town, lungs burning, legs shaking, the air thick with the stench of gunpowder and blood. Flares overhead painted the sky a pulsing red, and in the distance that monstrous, stitched-together nightmare, was staring through soldiers like they were paper dolls. Its claws, too many to count, glinted wetly in the crimson light, slashing through armor and bone with a sound like wet branches snapping. I just watched it crush a man with one of its twisted, insect-like arms, his scream cut short by a sickening crunch that echoed in my ears. My hands were trembling, clutching a kitchen knife I'd grabbed in a blind panic, useless against something that size. Ryan was gone, bolted into the smoke after freezing up at the gas station, and I was alone, ducking behind an overturned military truck, praying it wouldn't see me. My heart hammered so loud I thought it'd give me away, and every breath tasted like ash and fear. That was the moment I realized Havenwood wasn't just under attack, it was being erased, and I might not make it out alive. Let me back up. It started a few hours earlier, around 9 p.m. I was sprawled on my lumpy couch, half watching some reality show about rich people arguing over nothing, my thumb lazily swiping through my phone. The group chat was buzzing with weird rumors, people saying the freak storm that hit last week had unearthed something near the old wheat fields outside town. Heard noises under the ground last night, one guy typed. Probably just pipes, I muttered to myself, rolling my eyes. Havenwood folks loved a good conspiracy, especially since those army trucks started rolling through last month, headed toward the woods where no one's supposed to go. I didn't buy it. Tiresnian pa sa pa. I until my TV. Flick is the screen went static, a harsh whine cutting through the room. I sat up, annoyed, thinking the cable was crapping out again. Then my phone jolted in my hand, buzzing like it was possessed. An emergency alert flashed across the screen. We are sorry. No details, no instructions, just those 3 words glowing white against a black background. My stomach twisted, a cold, uneasy knot I couldn't shake. At the same time, the old radio in the corner, a dusty relic I hadn't touched in years, crackled to life. A robotic voice droned, we are sorry, over and over, like a broken record. I stood up, my skin prickling, and flipped off the TV. The silence didn't help, it just made the buzzing in my head louder. I texted Ryan, my best friend since high school, who works at the garage across town. You get that weird alert? My fingers were shaky, but I tried to play it cool. His reply came fast. Yeah, what the hell does we are sorry mean? Probably a glitch. I didn't have an answer. I crossed to the window, peeling back the curtain. The street was quiet, bathed in the usual yellow glow of the lamps, but something felt off. Then I heard it, a low hum, faint at first like a distant engine. It wasn't coming from the sky or the road, it was vibrating up through the floorboards, rattling the loose change on my coffee table. My pulse quickened. You hear that? I texted Ryan back. Like a plane or something, he replied. Getting louder here. Before I could type more, the hum turned into a roar. I stumbled to the door, yanking it open just as 2 black helicopters swept low over the rooftops, their blades chopping the night air. No markings, no lights except the blinding search beams that raked across the houses. My breath caught in my throat as they passed over my neighbor's place, Old Man Dawson's house. Then mine, flooding my living room with white light before plunging it back into shadow. I ducked instinctively, my mind racing. Ryan, helicopters over my street, I typed, hands sweaty. Soldiers here, he shot back. All black, gas masks, what the fuck is this? I peeked out again. Military vehicles, big, armored things, not like any National Guard trucks I'd ever seen, rolled down Lincoln Avenue, their matte black hulls swallowing the streetlight glow. Dozens of soldiers in tactical gear spilled out, moving fast, splitting into groups. They weren't shouting orders or kicking doors down like in the movies. They were knocking, calm and deliberate, which somehow made it worse. 2 of them approached Dawson's house. I saw the old man crack his door open, his grey hair wild like he'd just rolled out of bed. I couldn't hear what they said, but his head tilted, confused, then shook hard like he was saying no. One soldier put a hand on his shoulder, firm but not rough. Dawson froze, then twitched. His whole body jerked like he'd been shocked. His eyes rolled back just for a second, and when they settled, they were blank. He nodded slowly and stepped aside, letting them in. My mouth went dry. What the hell did they do to him? My phone buzzed. Power's out, Ryan texted. Right on cue, my lights flickered, once, twice, then died. The street lights blinked out, the houses went dark, even the military trucks dimmed. I stood there, frozen. The only sound, my own ragged breathing. Outside, the soldiers didn't flinch. They flipped down night vision goggles, their faint green glow bobbing as they moved house to house. This wasn't a blackout. This was planned. My gut sank as a new sound rolled in, a deep, heavy thudding under the ground, like something massive was shifting below us. I pressed myself to the window, squinting into the dark. The helicopters circled tighter now, their beams swinging wild, not at the houses anymore, toward the fields. Bro, we're in trouble, Ryan texted. I didn't get to reply. At 9:45, the silence shattered. A roar ripped through the air, not a siren, not thunder, not anything I'd ever heard. It was low, guttural, vibrating in my chest like it was clawing at my ribs. I stumbled back, gripping the windowsill so hard my knuckles ached. Gunfire erupted, sharp pops at first, then a full-on barrage. I saw muzzle flashes outside, soldiers shouting, flares dropping from the choppers, bathing everything in red-orange light. Something huge moved in the shadows, too fast for its size. My instincts screamed at me to run. I grabbed my backpack, stuffed in a flashlight and a knife from the kitchen, my hands shaking so bad I nearly dropped it. Ryan, we need to meet up, I texted, my breath hitching. Gas station. Hurry, he replied. I hesitated at the door, one hand on the knob, when screams, human screams, pierced the night. Not just panic, but raw animal terror. I threw the door open and stepped outside. The air hit me like a slap. Burnt, metallic, thick with blood and smoke. People were running barefoot in pajamas, shoving past each other, eyes wide with fear. I ducked low, sticking to the houses, my heart pounding in my ears. The back streets were my best shot. Main roads were crawling with soldiers and whatever they were fighting. A few blocks down, I turned a corner and froze. The street was gone, flattened like a bomb had hit. Cars were crumpled, pavement cracked, streetlights snapped in half. Bodies littered the ground, soldiers and civilians, some torn apart, limbs scattered like broken toys, others crushed flat, their rifles bent into useless twists of metal. My stomach lurched, bile rising in my throat. Whatever did this didn't just kill, it obliterated. My phone buzzed. Where are you, Ryan? Almost there, I typed back, forcing my legs to move. The roar came again, closer, followed by an explosion that shook the ground. My signal died. No bars, no service. I picked up my pace, weaving through the wreckage, glancing over my shoulder every few steps. The flares still glowed, casting long, twisted shadows that made every corner feel alive. When I reached the gas station, my chest tightened. The roof was half caved, glass everywhere. A pump ripped clean out of the ground like something had yanked it up for fun. Ryan, I called, my voice hoarse, barely cutting through the distant gunfire and chopper hum. Over here, he answered, faint but close. I vaulted over debris, finding him crouched behind the counter, pale and shaking. Thank God, I gasped, relief flooding me for half a second. Then the ground quaked, harder, deeper, like the earth itself was groaning. Ryan grabbed my wrist, yanking me down. Don't move, he hissed. The air thickened, heavy with something I couldn't name. Dust trickled from the cracked ceiling as the vibrations grew. I didn't want to look. Every nerve in my body screamed not to. But Ryan did, and I felt him go rigid. I swallowed hard and peeked over the counter. It was massive, bigger than anything should be. Its body was a nightmare patchwork, fur matted with blood, scales glinting wetly, bones jutting out at wrong angles, all stitched together into a hulking, pulsating mass. Dozens of insect legs jointed backward, bristled with claws that clicked against the pavement. Its torso heaved, slits in its flesh oozing black as it breathed. Its face was worse, a gaping mouth splitting open to reveal a second jaw, eyes mismatched, some glowing yellow, others empty sockets, all darting in different directions. It moved fast, too fast, darting between buildings with barely a sound, despite the wreckage it left behind. Soldiers opened fire, bullets and grenades lighting up the night, but it tore through them like they were nothing. One claw slashed a man in half, another crushed a soldier into the ground with that wet, leafy crunch I'd never done here. "We need to go," Ryan whispered, his voice trembling, his eyes locked on the thing. I nodded, but before we could move, a woman stumbled into the station, wild-eyed in a torn hazmat suit, clutching a blinking device. "You have to run," she yelled, her voice cracking. "They made it. It's not natural." I stared at her, my brain scrambling. "Who are you?" I demanded. "Evelyn Hart," she panted. "I worked on it. Cerberus, a weapon. The storm broke its cage." Her words hit me like a punch. "A weapon, this thing?" A kid's voice cut through the chaos. "Help!" I turned. Tommy Dawson, the old man's son, staggering toward us, tears streaking his dirt-smeared face. "My dad. They did something to him." Ryan grabbed his shoulder. "What happened?" Tommy sobbed. "His eyes went white and he called it mother." My blood ran cold. Outside, the soldiers were losing ground, their screams mixing with the monster's roars. Evelyn shoved the device at me. "This can stop it, disrupt its signal, but someone's gotta get close." I stared at her, then at the thing tearing my town apart. "You're insane," I said. She didn't flinch. "We're dead anyway." The gas station trembled as another roar shook the air, closer now, rattling the broken glass under my boots. I clutched Evelyn's device, its red light pulsing like a heartbeat in my sweaty palm. My mind was a mess, fear, adrenaline, and a sick kind of anger churning together. Tommy was huddled against Ryan, his small frame shaking, snot dripping down his chin as he muttered, "He's not my dad anymore. He's not my dad." Ryan's face was ghost white, his jaw tight, eyes darting between me and the shattered windows. "Jake, we can't stay here," he said, his voice barely steady. "That thing's gonna flatten this place." "Das." I nodded, my throat so dry it hurt to swallow. "We stick together. Gas station's done. We head for the back roads, maybe find a car." Evelyn cut in, her voice sharp despite the tremor in it. "No, you don't get it. Running won't help unless we kill that signal. It's not just muscle, it's controlling them." She pointed outside and I followed her gaze. Through the flickering red haze of the flares, I saw them. People, not soldiers, stepping out of the shadows. Old man Dawson was at the front, his head tilted at a wrong angle, eyes blank and milky, mouth twitching into a grin that made my skin crawl. Behind him were others. Mrs. Carter from the bakery, the kid who delivered my paper, even Pastor Green, all moving like puppets, their steps jerky, their lips moving in unison. "Mother's here," they whispered over and over, a chorus that drilled into my skull. "What the fuck?" Ryan breathed, pulling Tommy closer. The kid whimpered, burying his face in Ryan's jacket. My stomach twisted. Those weren't people anymore. They were extensions of that thing, its eyes and hands reaching into every corner of Havenwood. Evelyn's grip tightened on my arm. Cerberus was built to dominate, DNA spliced from something they found in the Arctic, mixed with human tissue. "It's telepathic, Jake. The soldiers in black? They're its first wave, carriers. Anyone they touch turns." I stared at her, the weight of it sinking in. "So Dawson, infected," she finished. "And it's spreading." A crash outside snapped me back. The monster, Cerberus, lunged into view, its claws raking through a military jeep like it was tinfoil. Soldiers fired, their bullets sparking uselessly off its cracked hide, grenades bursting in clouds of smoke and fire. It didn't even flinch, just swung one of those twisted arms and sent a man flying, his body slamming into a wall with a wet thud. My legs locked up, every instinct screaming to bolt, but Evelyn's voice anchored me. "The device, it's a disruptor. Get it within 10 feet, hit the switch and it fries the signal. No signal, no control, it might collapse." "Might?" I snapped, my voice cracking. She met my eyes, hers hard and tired. "It's all we've got." Ryan shook his head, panic spilling out. "No way, Jake. You saw what it did. We're not getting near that thing." I wanted to agree, to grab him and Tommy and run until my lungs gave out, but the whispers outside were getting louder, closer. "Mother's here! Mother's here!" I peeked over the counter. Dawson and his puppet crew were shuffling toward the station, their blank stares locked on us. We were trapped. "Okay," I said, forcing the word out, my chest tight. "I'll do it, but you're coming with me." Evelyn nodded, grim but resolute. Ryan hesitated, then cursed under his breath. "Fine, but Tommy stays behind the counter. He's not dying out there." The kid looked up, eyes wide and wet. "Don't leave me," he begged, grabbing my sleeve. I knelt, my hands shaking as I pried his fingers off. "You're tougher than you think, kid. Stay low, stay quiet. We'll be back." It was a lie, maybe, but I couldn't look at his face and say anything else. We moved fast, crawling over the wreckage, glass crunching under my knees. The air outside was thick, choking. Burnt fuel, blood, and something soured I couldn't place. Cerberus was a block away, tearing into another squad, its roars drowning out their screams. The infected were closer, Dawson's group fanning out, cutting off the side streets. "Back door," Ryan hissed, pointing to a rusted exit behind the station. We slipped through, my heart hammering as I clutched the disruptor, its weight pulling at my arm. The alley was narrow, littered with trash and broken crates, the red flare light casting long, jagged shadows that danced like ghosts. Halfway down, a figure stepped out. Mrs. Carter, her apron still tied on, flour dusted across her face, but her eyes were gone, just white voids. She tilted her head, sniffing the air like a dog. "Mother sees you," she rasped, her voice layered. "Wrong." I froze, my breath hitching. Ryan shoved me forward. "Go," he yelled just as she lunged, her nails clawing at my jacket. I swung the knife, catching her arm. Black blood oozed out, thick and sticky, and she didn't even flinch. Evelyn grabbed a pipe from the ground and smashed it across her head, dropping her in a heap. "Keep moving," she barked, her voice raw. We burst onto a side street, Cerberus' shadow looming ahead, its legs clicking against the pavement. My legs burned, my lungs ached, but I pushed on, the disruptor's light blinking faster now. "How close?" I gasped. "Closer!" Evelyn shouted. Soldiers were falling back, their line breaking, and I saw why. Cerberus' skin was splitting, black tendrils wriggling out, lashing at anything that moved. One wrapped around a soldier's leg, yanking him up like a rag doll before snapping him in half. Blood sprayed, hot and wet, splattering across my face. I gagged, wiping it off with my sleeve, my stomach heaving. "Jake!" Ryan's voice cracked behind me. I turned. He was lagging, his foot caught in a tangle of barbed wire from a wrecked barricade. "Shit! Hold on!" I yelled, doubling back. The infected were closing in. Pastor Green now, his cross dangling crookedly, muttering "Mother" as he reached for Ryan. I slashed at his hand, the knife sinking into flesh that felt too soft, too cold. He didn't scream, just kept coming. Ryan yanked free, blood seeping through his jeans, his face twisted in pain. "I'm fine, go," he lied, limping after me. Evelyn waved us toward an overturned Humvee, its side dented but solid. "There, cover!" We dove behind it, my chest heaving, the disruptor slippery in my grip. Cerberus was 20 feet away, its eyes, those horrible mismatched eyes, swiveling, searching. "Now or never," Evelyn said, her voice steady despite the chaos. I nodded, my hands trembling as I flipped the switch. The device hummed, a high-pitched whine cutting through the air. Cerberus froze, its head snapping toward us, a low growl rumbling from its chest. "It's working," Evelyn whispered, hope flickering in her eyes. Then Ryan screamed. I spun. Dawson had him, his bony hands locked around Ryan's throat, those white eyes inches from his face. "Mother wants you," Dawson hissed, his voice a guttural snarl. Ryan thrashed, clawing at him, but Dawson was too strong. Unnaturally strong. "No," I yelled, lunging with the knife, driving it into Dawson's side. Black blood poured out, but he didn't let go. Evelyn grabbed my arm. "The signal, finish it," she shouted, pulling me back. I hesitated, torn, Ryan's gasp choking in my ears. "Jake, do it!" he croaked, his voice fading. Cerberus roared, charging now, its claws gouging the pavement. I ran, the disruptor screaming in my hands, my legs pumping on pure adrenaline. 10 feet 5, I was close enough to smell it, a rancid mix of rot and metal, its tendrils lashed out, one grazing my arm, burning like acid. I screamed but kept going, slamming the device into the ground at its feet. The whine peaked, a shockwave ripping through the air. Cerberus convulsed, its body splitting wider, black ooze pouring out as it shrieked, a sound that clawed at my brain. Soldiers opened fire again, rockets slamming into it, fire and smoke swallowing the street. I stumbled back, falling hard, my ears ringing. Through the haze I saw Ryan, free, crawling away from Dawson's limp body, gasping for air. Evelyn was beside me, her face smeared with soot. "It's down," she panted, but her eyes widened. Cerberus wasn't dead. It was shifting, its flesh knitting back together, slower but alive. "We need to go," I said, dragging her up. Ryan limped over, his face a mask of pain and terror. "Where's Tommy?" he rasped. My heart sank, we'd left him. The gas station was a wreck, but I spotted movement. Tommy peering out from behind the counter, alive. "Kid!" I yelled, waving him over. He ran, dodging debris, tears streaming down his face. "I thought you were gone," he sobbed, crashing into me. I hugged him tight, relief crashing over me like a wave, but it didn't last. A new sound cut through the night, a deep mechanical hum, different from the choppers. Floodlights flared in the distance, a barricade on the main road out of town, soldiers barking orders. "That's our shot," Evelyn said, pointing. "The convoy. They'll evac survivors." I nodded, grabbing a dead soldier's jacket and rifle from the ground. "Put these on," I told Ryan and Tommy, my voice hoarse. "We blend in." Ryan winced as he shrugged the gear on, his leg bleeding bad. Tommy looked tiny in the oversized vest, but he didn't complain. Evelyn stayed in her hazmat rags. No time to change. We staggered toward the checkpoint, the ground shaking as Cerberus's roars grew faint behind us. Soldiers were everywhere, their faces grim, some bandaged, others staring into nothing. One spotted us, raising his gun. "Stop!" he barked. I froze, hands up, the rifle slung loose. "Ground unit, Lincoln Avenue," I lied, my voice shaking but firm. "We got hit, separated." He glared, then a tremor rocked the pavement and his radio crackled. "It's moving on the checkpoint, prepare to engage." He waved us through. "Get in the truck, now!" We piled into a transport, squeezing between wounded soldiers, their eyes hollow. The truck lurched forward, tires screeching as we sped out of Havenwood. I looked back. Flames swallowed the skyline, buildings collapsing, choppers raining missiles. Cerberus emerged from the smoke, faster now, its body pulsing with that black, writhing mass. A missile hit, fire blooming, but it kept coming. Then my phone buzzed. One last alert. "We regret to inform you, containment has failed. God help us all." The convoy's radio flared. "Code Black, clear the zone," a soldier whispered. "They're nuking it." Seconds later, a white flash blinded me, a shockwave slamming the truck. I shielded Tommy, my ears popping, my lungs aching. When I looked again, Havenwood was gone, a smoking crater under a mushroom cloud. Ryan gripped my arm, his breath ragged. "We made it," he said, "but it didn't feel like winning." Tommy sobbed quietly and Evelyn was gone, lost in the chaos, maybe still out there with her device. I stared at the ruins of my life, the weight of it crushing me, knowing whatever Cerberus was, it wasn't over, not really. The truck jolted over the cracked pavement, the rumble of its engine barely drowning out the distant echoes of explosions behind us. I sat wedged between Ryan and Tommy, my hands still trembling, the soldier's rifle heavy across my lap. Ryan's breathing was shallow, his legs soaked with blood, his face twisted in pain every time the truck hit a bump. Tommy clung to my arm, his small body shaking, his eyes fixed on the floor like he could will himself somewhere else. The other soldiers in the back were silent, their faces smudged with grime and blood, staring at nothing. No one spoke. No one had to. We'd all seen it, felt it, that thing ripping Havenwood apart like it was nothing more than a child's toy set, smashed underfoot. I couldn't stop replaying it in my head. Evelyn's last stand, the way she'd grabbed the disruptor from me when Cerberus started stitching itself back together. "I started this," she'd said, her voice breaking but firm. "I end it." She'd run straight at it, dodging its slashing claws, the device screaming in her hands. I'd yelled after her, my throat raw, but she didn't look back. The explosion when she triggered it was blinding. A fireball swallowing her and Cerberus both, the shockwave knocking me flat. For a moment, I thought it was over, the monster's roars fading into the crackle of flames. But then, through the smoke, I'd seen it move, slow, wounded, but alive, its black tendrils wriggling like worms in the wreckage. My stomach had dropped, a cold dread sinking in. We hadn't killed it, we'd just pissed it off. The convoy sped on, the mushroom cloud rising behind us, a towering grey beast swallowing what was left of my town. I pressed my forehead against the cool metal of the truck, trying to steady my breathing, but my chest felt like it was caving in. Havenwood was gone. My house, my job, every boring day I'd ever complained about, erased in a flash of white light. But worse than that was the guilt gnawing at me. Evelyn was dead because I couldn't do it myself, because I'd hesitated when she hadn't. Ryan was hurt because I'd dragged him into this mess. And Tommy, God, Tommy, had lost everything. His dad turned into some hollowed-out puppet before the end. I should have done more, been faster, braver. Instead, I was here, alive, while the people who mattered paid the price. "Jake!" Ryan rasped, his voice pulling me out of my spiral. I turned to him, his eyes glassy but sharp. "You okay?" I forced a nod, my throat too tight to speak. "You?" I managed. He grimaced, glancing at his leg. "Been better, but we're out. That's something." I wanted to believe him, to grab onto that thin thread of hope, but the truck's radio crackled to life, shattering it. "All units, Code Black confirmed, containment failure at Site Delta. Secondary teams report movement, target is active. Repeat, Target is active. My blood ran cold. Active. Cerberus wasn't dead, not even close. The nuke had leveled Havenwood, but it hadn't stopped that thing. A soldier across from me cursed under his breath, his hands tightening on his gun. They said it'd be over, he muttered, more to himself than us. They always say that. I looked at him. Young, maybe 20, his face pale under the dirt, his eyes hollowed out by whatever he'd seen before picking us up. What happens now? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. He didn't meet my gaze. They'll hunt it. Or it'll hunt us. Either way, it's not done. His words hung in the air, heavy and suffocating, like the smoke still clinging to my clothes. The truck slowed, pulling into a makeshift camp a few miles out. Tents and floodlights, soldiers scrambling with crates and weapons, choppers buzzing overhead. They hauled us out, medics swarming Ryan and Tommy, barking orders about triage and quarantine. I stood there, numb, the rifle slipping from my hands to clatter on the ground. A medic grabbed my arm, checking me for wounds, but I barely felt it. My eyes were locked on the horizon, where the cloud still loomed, its edges glowing faintly red in the dark. Somewhere out there, Cerberus was crawling, licking its wounds, growing stronger. I could feel it, a prickling at the back of my neck, like it knew I'd gotten away, like it was waiting. They put us in a tent, Ryan on a cot with a bandage around his leg, Tommy curled up beside him, finally asleep after crying himself out. A soldier handed me a blanket and a bottle of water, his face blank. Rest while you can, he said. We move at dawn. I nodded, but sleep wasn't coming. Not with the weight of everything pressing down on me. I sat by Ryan, watching his chest rise and fall, grateful he was still here, even if he hated me for dragging him through hell. We made it, I whispered, more to convince myself than him. He didn't answer, just groaned softly in his sleep. Hours passed. The camp buzzing with activity outside, shouted commands, engines revving, the crackle of radios. I must have dozed off because I jolted awake to a new sound. A low, guttural hum, faint but growing, vibrating through the ground. My heart stopped. I knew that sound. I stumbled to the tent flap, peering out. The soldiers were on edge, guns raised, floodlights swinging toward the tree line. Contact! Northwest! Someone yelled, and then I saw it. A shadow moving in the dark, too big, too fast. Cerberus. Its claws glinted as it emerged, smaller now, wounded, but alive, its eyes locking on the camp. Screams erupted, gunfire tearing through the night, but I knew it wouldn't stop. It never stopped. I turned back to Ryan and Tommy, my hands shaking as I shook them awake. We have to go, I said, my voice cracking. Ryan groaned, sitting up, his face pale. What now? Tommy's eyes widened, terror flooding back. It's here, I said, and that was enough. We stumbled out, chaos exploding around us, soldiers firing, tents collapsing, a chopper spiraling down in flames. Cerberus roared, a sound that rattled my bones, its tendrils lashing out, dragging men into the dark. It was weaker, slower, but still unstoppable, a nightmare that wouldn't die. We ran, me half carrying Ryan, Tommy clinging to my side, dodging debris and bodies, the camp falling apart behind us. I didn't know where we were going, just away, anywhere but here. My legs burned, my lungs screamed, but I kept moving, driven by a desperate, primal need to survive. Cerberus's roars faded as we hit the woods, the gunfire growing distant, but I didn't stop. I couldn't. We collapsed miles later under a cluster of pines, gasping, soaked in sweat and blood. Ryan leaned against a tree, his breathing ragged. Think it's gone? He asked, voice weak. I didn't answer, just stared into the dark, waiting for that hum to come back. It didn't. Not then. Dawn broke, grey and cold. The three of us huddled together, alive but broken. I'd gotten us out, me, Ryan, Tommy. We'd survived when Havenwood hadn't, when Evelyn hadn't. It wasn't triumph, not with the cost, but it was something. A chance to keep going, to fight another day. Cerberus was out there though, licking its wounds, plotting its next move. It lost this round, but I knew it had come back, angrier, hungrier. A monster born from human arrogance that wouldn't rest until it had us all. Its suffering was my only comfort. A small, bitter victory knowing it hurt, knowing it wasn't invincible. Looking back, I learned something that night. Mess with things you don't understand, and they'll mess with you 10 times worse. Havenwood died because someone thought they could play God, and we're still paying for it. Me, Ryan, Tommy, we're not heroes, just survivors carrying scars that won't fade. If you're hearing this, wherever you are, tell me, what would you have done? Run, fought, or just prayed for it to end? Drop your thoughts below because I'm still figuring it out and I could use the company. Maybe you've seen something like this too, something that shouldn't exist but does. Share it. I'm listening.